I chose not to learn to drive for like till I was 25, 26. And that was because I just couldn't stand like looking around and saying, everyone's saying there are these problems with climate change, with overconsumption of fossil fuels, all of these things. So I just decided I wasn't going to learn to drive, and the plan was to never learn to drive. But at some point you hit these barriers of like, I am being left out of social events, I am compromising career options, I'm compromising all these things. I'm spending an hour and a half on an empty bus that's spewing diesel to get to and from work, and I'm not sure I'm making any difference in terms of environmental benefit by choosing not to drive. It's not that I discourage people from trying to live a greener life. I absolutely try to live a greener life myself, but at some point you hit a diminishing return on investment and you have to accept that there are compromises involved and sacrifices involved. I get really frustrated when people say that it's easy to be green, right? Or it's easy to go vegan, or it's easy to never fly again. I vowed never to fly again, and then literally the last trip I was ever going to take, I promptly fell in love with someone on the other side of the Atlantic. And you're forced to face these real tensions between what your values are and what your desired life is. And if we understand that each of us is in a different context and a different position, then the question doesn't become what should we all do, but rather what should I do to get us towards that goal that we're all trying to get to. Because if we all do the same thing, we're never going to get where we need to go. So one of the examples I love to talk about is Amsterdam. It's one of my favorite cities in the world, and if you ever go to Amsterdam, like, it's crazy the number of bikes that are just coming in and out of Central Station, like thousands and thousands of bikes every day, and they sort of don't follow any rules that you can really figure out. And people think it's been like that forever. And actually Amsterdam in the 70s was turning into a city just like every other. Cars were taking over. They were actually paving over the canals to make room for car parking. And what happened is the Dutch pushed back. They realized they didn't want to go down this route. And you ended up having a really diverse group of actors trying to make that happen. So you had anarchists like literally pushing cars into canals, but you also had historic preservationists, and you had families who just didn't want traffic on their roads. You had, you had politicians who realized that there was a constituency here to speak to. And what I would like for us all to realize is that it's much bigger than any one of us. And my role might not be what your role is. So the example would be like, say, so you're a filmmaker, right? Like, you make films. Where do you have the biggest leverage to create change? Probably in your filmmaking. And you do all this other stuff too, right? Like, you drive a hybrid car, and you compost, and you walk to the coffee shop around the corner, and all of those things. But your place to really focus your attention is in your filmmaking or in the work you do professionally, right? And we can all find those places, right? Like, if you're a member of a faith community, maybe you lean in there. If you're super into composting, right? Like, get into your composting, and then start a composting program at your kid's school, and then take it out from there. So a big part of it is taking the lens from the individual and then expanding outwards. So the way I look at it is like, I have a few things that I do really well. I write, so I lean into my writing. We are not all climate hypocrites if you talk on a global scale. When I say we, I mean very specifically we in the top 10% of global wealth, which is every single one of us, probably everyone watching this video. So it's almost inevitable, however much you care about climate change, however much you want to move to a world beyond fossil fuels, you're forced to live within a system that is powered by fossil fuels. So if you've got someone protesting an oil tanker and they're using a kayak, inevitably someone's going to turn around and say, well, you know that kayak's made from oil, right? Or if someone writes a book about climate hypocrisy, someone's going to tell you, well, you know your computer's powered by coal. Like, no shit, of course we know that, right? So one, the idea of saying we're all climate hypocrites now is kind of to disarm that angle. But the other is that often hypocrisy is used in this really clumsy way within the movement, where we're pointing fingers at each other and kind of saying, well, you can't be an environmentalist if, right? You can't be an environmentalist if you eat meat. You can't be an environmentalist if you drive a car. Sure, we're all hypocrites, but so what? The problem still exists, climate change still exists, and we still need to fix it.